Okay, welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission. This is a special meeting. It's Thursday, December 6th. The time is 5:21 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Craig Noddy, he's absent. Commissioner Doom?
Present.
Commissioner Morgan? Here. Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
Thank you. 4 presents.
Okay, item 2 on the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, December 3rd, 2018 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Number 3 is the approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was September 20th, 2018. Are there any comments or corrections?
I have none. Oh.
One comment.
Okay.
The 1121 Cortez Drive was to be continued till the October 18th HBC meeting.
Yeah, that was
We didn't have that meeting, so.
right. It would have moved to tonight, but the applicants withdrew the nomination.
Oh, okay.
So we're okay legally.
Okay. Then with that, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Sure. Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Doom?
Yes.
Madam Chair Shire?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, for number 4, oral communications. I don't believe we have any that are not pertaining to agenda items. So we will move to item 5, comments from commissioners.
I only have one small thing. It's a little bit of a self-promotion. So if you have a chance to get
You
the
look
Royal
great
Navy,
there.
It's on John Wayne, growing up in Glendale, and I happen to be the person that advised the person that wrote the article. So
And what's the publication for everyone?
it's the Arroyo with the Pasadena
Right.
magazine, but it's about John Wayne in Glendale, Marion Morrison. So anyway, it's an interesting read. So anyway, that's it.
Thank
That's my
you.
own self-promotion.
I actually read that article. Thank you.
Staff has been very curious. I was told by someone many years ago now that her husband was researching various locations where Wayne was known to have lived because the family evidently moved around a lot. And she said, "Oh, I'll hook you up." That hookup never happened. Do you or do you know of anyone who knows of these places? Because we would like to look at those more closely.
Yeah.
Well, I listed them when you did the South Glendale Community Plan.
Yeah?
I put like 6 of them, 7 of them that I could verify. Most of
Seriously?
the buildings don't exist anymore.
Okay, maybe that's why it...
Yeah, they're gone.
Yeah.
They've been replaced.
Mm-hmm. But some still stand?
Some still stand.
And was that in your list?
It was.
Okay, we will go back. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will go back and find that.
Any other comments? Okay. Number 6 is old business, and seeing that we have none, we'll move to 7, new business. 7A is 3030 Edgewick Drive. This is a Glendale Register nomination and a Mills Act application.
Give me a second. All right. 3030 Edgewick is a very interesting property located in the Chevy Chase Estates neighborhood. It's built in 1929. It's one of the earlier properties in that neighborhood. That's a good one. As those of you who know your styles can see, this is pretty obviously a Tudor Revival house. It's a really excellent example of the Tudor Revival. It has had some significant alterations over the years, and we'll talk about those in a bit. But when you see it from the street, certainly it carries much of its original character, original materials, and just its sense of place as a hillside home in one of our kind of rural developments that were celebrated for that rural nature, where the trees were such an important part of how these areas were built out and promoted, and this property itself carries a lot of that meaning with it still to this day. So we'll look at a few more pictures. A lot of character-defining features are intact. I'd say the most notable feature of this house is its extensive use of brick. We don't have a lot of fully brick houses. This is still a frame structure, but it has brick cladding. I think what's especially nice on this one is the use of the clinker brick, which is the dark, kind of distorted, overheated in the kiln type bricks that give these properties that use them a lot of character, a lot of texture, color variations. So that's probably the most prominent feature, but the front-facing gables, the small window panes, almost all of the windows on the house are original steel casement windows. We have this fantastic half-round stairwell with the kind of crenellated castle-like turret across the top. A nice entryway with a kind of a semi-Tudor arch, a bay window with the the metal roofing, and then slate roofing throughout the house, which is very characteristic of the higher end examples of Tudor Revival. This little feature here on the left picture at the front is a bathroom addition that was made early on in the house's history. And what's fascinating about this house is, we have a very nice property. It was the home of Thorkild Tom Knudsen and his wife Valley Knudsen, who Tom Knudsen founded Knudsen Dairies, founded the Knudsen Creamery Company, was very important in terms of the dairy industry, in terms of inventions and creating new products. Most famous for creating cottage cheese made with skim milk, which I learned through this application. Prior to that, skim milk was just a waste product that would get dumped in the dairying process, and they were able to find a use for that. And I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Los Angeles. I knew Knudsen since forever, and I think it is truly an iconic business. We don't have a lot of those, and I always caution people who are proposing properties where they suggest that they're associated with significant people, that, just running a nice business and doing well and being a member of the right clubs and making some money isn't enough necessarily. But as I considered the application and looked into the research and thought about not just Tom Knudsen, but also his wife, I realized this was kind of a real significant couple, and it's nice to have both members of a household achieve some level of significance. So Tom did this with his brother, but Tom seemed to be the main partner and ran the company into the 40s and then retired. It was bought and run downhill by a couple companies later, but it continued operating for decades as kind of the main dairy company in the West and one of the biggest in the nation. And here's a picture of Tom, and here's a picture of Valley, and just kind of floating in space there. But Valley Knudsen is equally important, and perhaps even on a wider scale and in a way that affects people more to this day. She was the founder of Los Angeles Beautiful, which was one of the key civic beautification groups in early Los Angeles, not early Los Angeles, and then mid-century Los Angeles. And they were responsible for many acts. They're probably most famous today for doing a lot of tree planting, and you can see on the upper left picture the coral trees that run along the median on San Vicente Boulevard were planted and promoted by Los Angeles Beautiful. They also gave out awards. They did all kinds of things to do civic enhancement projects. Both Tom and Valley were involved in many other clubs and associations, but I would say Los Angeles Beautiful is important because she founded the group. She was with it for decades. She was instrumental in their work. When you go to the Heritage Square Museum in Highland Park, which hopefully everyone goes to, you see the Second Empire house that you see in the bottom right picture, which is one of the only Second Empire properties left in all of Los Angeles area, is known as the Valley Knudsen House, as well as the Shaw House. And that was because Los Angeles Beautiful, under her direction, was instrumental in saving this house and then bringing it to Heritage Square. So as we looked at the nomination, we felt that the association with the Knudsens met criteria 2. As you know, properties are eligible for designation for meeting only one criterion. And we do think that the character of the house and the level of intact Tudor Revival architecture is important and also eligible. Here are a couple of other views of kind of from the sides of the property. It's a very large lot, so it has extensive grounds and is quite lovely in many ways. And when the consultant hired by the owners, the Averys, first came to me and I looked at this garage, I was like, what's going on here? This is a problem. This is very awkward. This is not proportional. It turns out that in 1949, Tom Knudsen had this added to the top of the existing three-car garage that was one story, and the reason it was added was specifically for his big game trophies. He was an avid hunter, going all over the world, doing his hunting stuff. And that, in some ways, helps explain things like this very strange, the head height over the window to the roof line is part of what makes this so awkward. And I'm speculating here, but it's probably worth that speculation. If you have mounted heads of animals going all over this room, well, that's probably what was going on above this window and then the corresponding window on the other side facing out to the valley below. The connection to this, there's an interior connection that goes from the house to what they call the game or the trophy room, and that is this is a feature of the 1949 edition, but it has since been altered, and we have no record for this alteration. And to be honest, I didn't go back and look at the staff report. I'm not sure how clear I was about that, but it's very obvious that the sliding glass doors are not original doors. But when you look at the original drawing, or the 1949 drawings for this work, you can see that there were large sliding glass, or sliding windows that more or less filled the expanse here, creating kind of a glassy link between the buildings. But there was a different kind of situation. There weren't these balcony railings. There was kind of a tongue-and-groove horizontal wood siding, kind of just a low kind of wall that spanned across the bottom of the opening, and then the window on top of that. And then this original side entrance in the bottom right picture, bottom right picture, was also a change made by the Knudsens, that this was originally kind of a notch in the building, as you can see in the roof above. That was kind of glassed in with a sliding glass door, and then a roof was put on that, and then this deck was added at some point. So the decks are a little confusing in the history of the house. There are other decks at the back. So this is an addition that was made at the rear by the Knudsen family. It added a bedroom and a bathroom at the first level. It appears to have always had a flat roof. There may have been a deck on that from the beginning, but it's not clear because we don't have a permit history for this. The railings are nicely designed and seem to fit the Tudor Revival style, but they are rather extensive when you look at them. I felt that because the property is significant for the Knudsens, and these changes were made during the Knudsens' ownership, even though they've been somewhat altered since then. But even when the Knudsens made those changes, they weren't exactly in keeping with the Tudor style or the steel casement with windows with small panes. Looking at these changes via the Secretary's standards, we can say that they are differentiated from the original. To some degree, they're reversible. And to my mind, to some degree, they also reflect what was done by the Knudsens. And since the house is significant for its association with them, we believe the period of significance stretches through their occupancy in the house. And I'm going to refresh my memory on this. Through
74, I think.
74, exactly, yes. So the period of significance would be 1929, when the Knudsens had the house built, through 1974. So here are some other pictures. So this is on the lower left is the back side of the garage. You can see the break in the brick. It's subtle, but you can note the transition. It must have been quite hard to try to match this kind of brick. I would say that the person finding and selecting the brick did a pretty good job, although the clinker bricks aren't quite as clinkery as they were in the original construction, but they're still in place. And going back to this area, we do have, this is an interior photo showing this linkage. The photo's taken from inside the sunroom in the house. The 2 steps up go into the trophy room, and this shows the kind of glassy quality. My best sense, looking at the original drawings, which we'll look at in a second, make it seem like there was a low wood kind of railing, more or less, or just a low wall here that would have had a two-part sliding glass window on top of it, both in this location and on the left side. So that is what we see here in plan view. This is the sun porch. This area on the lower left is the trophy room. The photo we were just looking at was taken from somewhere about here in the middle of the sun porch. And you can see here 8-foot by 5-foot gliding aluminum type half vented screened window here. And the same spec is for this window facing toward the rear yard. And then in the next photo, we can see elevation views showing tongue and groove horizontal siding, the sliding windows pretty much spanning the entire opening on both sides. And then this would be this low kind of railing wall that was faced with the tongue and groove siding. And you see the tongue and groove here, and here you see it in section. So those are the main alterations that the house has gone through. In general, I think the addition at the rear, the bathroom addition, is appropriate. The number of balconies is what it is right now, although there could be, the commission can take that into consideration and make any condition they'd like. If the applicant were interested in getting this designated without any issues with that, they might ask that it be designated only for its association with the Knudsen's, in which case the commission would still have design review authority to ask for changes, but it might lessen the importance because most of these changes reflect what happened during the Knudsen ownership to some degree. The windows, this is the front bay window adjacent to the front door. When we looked at this, there's leaded glass in here. It looks really clean and crisp and new. We don't have any history of when this was replaced. It was done previous to the new owners moving into the house. It does look appropriate. Usually you think that instead of these kind of squarish diamonds, you usually have more sharply vertical diamonds for this kind of window. But we thought that this was appropriate, especially that we don't know what was there. And then the only other issue isn't a huge thing, but it is a bigger than it used to be kind of thing. It's this gas lamp that was installed by the current owners. And this is a picture showing the original, I can't say it's the original, but it looks like it could be, but a fixture that's more appropriate in scale. To me, this isn't a deal breaker for any designation, but I didn't want to leave it hanging and not call it to the commission's attention. I failed to get a photograph of the rear facade. There's one downspout that is kind of just a large chunk of it's missing, and ultimately, like today, it's probably not doing justice to the nice masonry. So we have a Mills Act condition recommended to fix that, and then another to consider replacing the gas lamp at the front. And that concludes your staff presentation.
Did you address any of the other structures on the property in your assessment?
I don't have photographs of them. I mentioned them in the, I forgot to add a picture of the pool. I literally finished this 2 minutes before 5, so I did not include a picture of the pool. Pool was added in the 1980s. There is an interesting structure, for those of you who visited, perhaps you saw it, but to the, when you're standing at the driveway side of the house, it's behind you. And there's a permit for an early kind of platform, and we don't know what that means. That's all the permit says. It's possible that that would be it. There's some masonry work that looks older. The lower part of that looks older than the wood above. And if you did have a chance to look at it, the wood above is not in very good condition. The Averys, I believe, are not using this structure because of that. They expressed an interest in doing something there in the future. I can't say that it's even historic, but we would work with them to change that structure if needed, and then bring it to the commission if we found there was anything of historical interest that needed to be reviewed.
Okay.
So,
Any questions for staff before we open the public hearing?
No.
Okay. Then we have one speaker card, Wesley Avery.
Good evening. I'd like to start off by saying I realize you're volunteers. I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
With regards to the sliding glass doors, despite the expense to replace them, we will work with Jay to come up with something historical. I think I told you that the integrity of the sliding glass doors are in question. So we've submitted a plan, and I believe we will have the sliding glass doors replaced within a year.
Do I have a plan?
Vanessa
a
gave
work
you,
plan.
we had a
Oh, the work plan, yes,
Work
okay,
plan.
yeah. Mhm.
Do you wanna
let's
tell
see.
us-
Go ahead.
Do you want to tell us why you're coming before us to get the house on the register or anything?
We have a lot of pride in the house, and we'd like to be good neighbors, and I guess we would like it to be an inspiration of the city of Glendale. So
Excellent.
that would be our goal. I guess that's it.
Did you have a chance to read what the
I did.
thing said?
Yeah,
Do you agree with most of it?
I think it's interesting. Yeah, that's good. Whoever did that, they put a lot of work in.
Well, our staff reports, Vanessa did a lot of work. Our staff reports are distillations of what we get. A little bit thrown on top.
Will we
so-
get a plate or something?
We'll work with you on that, but yes, we have a plaque program. You don't get it, you buy it.
Or
but-
is there a plaque we could buy?
You have the
Yes, there's a plaque
privilege
you could
of
buy, yeah.
purchasing one.
Yeah. We have to wait for city council approval. We have to wait for this approval
Right.
recommendation first.
Okay.
but,
Well, I don't want to waste your time. Anyway.
Are there any other questions before we close? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll close the public session and open it up for commissioners' comments.
You probably want to go first.
Well, I'd just like to say, I want to thank the Averys for allowing me to go there. I mean, Wesley gave me such a good tour. It was an e-ticket tour. It's a wonderful house. I mean, you know, when you approach it, I was reminded of it almost looks like Toad Hall from Wind in the Willows in many, many ways. It's gorgeous. I mean, you have to take, the pictures that they gave just don't show justice. You know, I wanted to say something about the game room or the great room. You know, it's almost with the Knutsons, it's almost like, you know, it's good to be king because if you're the king of a castle, and that in many ways with its own parapet, you have to have a room where you can put your trophies, I guess, now that they're no longer something that's, but in the 30s and 40s, it was something you did. So
If you're rich.
if you're well off, is the word we like to use. It's from every angle. It's really nice. And when I talked to Mr. Avery and he was willing to replace the glass doors, that was one of my main concerns. When it was down by the pool, even though it was 1984, it still evokes something that was out of the 30s. It's kind of rectangular in shape and the whole bit. And there was that room that was outside over by as you go down, it's kind of like where a barbecue and stuff and the whole bit. Even that seemed to be kind of appropriate for it. So, you know, I would like to say, other than the few things that the staff has recommended to having be changed, there's not a lot that I would see. I like the fact that the gas lamp in the front, it may be oversized, but it's a real gas lamp. It's not one of those little things where they have the flickering little electric light and the whole bit. I mean, it's a true gas lamp. So size-wise, I mean, I really have no opinion. It would be nice if it wasn't so dominant, but other than that, I have no problem with it. So I'm all for this house. I mean, the thing is, it also sits on its property very, very well. If you go to the house and you look at it and they allow you to go through the house and look through the valley. I mean, it dominates the Chevy Chase Canyon. I mean, not in a bad way, but you have a full sweep like you would have a castle in Northumberland or anywhere else. It's just it's when they designed it, who is it? The builder, William Harry Nichols. He knew what he was doing. I didn't have a chance to look him up today, unfortunately, but he placed it in the right spot. I mean, it has its view, like I've said, is just perfect. The building of it. The only thing I was interested in, I didn't at the time. I was looking at the parapet, and I was wondering, can you get to that parapet or not? You know,
Are you
it's
talking
just,
about the garage?
no, that one, no, in the front.
The curved.
This?
Yes.
I don't think so.
The answer is no.
Yeah. Okay. I just, you know, but it's,
Want to get your bow and arrow and
yeah, it's fire down on all the,
check the neighborhood?
and all the minions. No, I'm all for it. I would like to, I'm not as good at picking up stuff that have to be, picked out, but I'll wait for the rest of my commissioners to make their ideas known. So I'm all for it, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thought you were going to give us a more extensive history on Mr. Knudsen.
Oh, I could give you one last little thing. One last, sorry. No, it's, I got married up in Chevy Chase Canyon back in 1983. No, 1973. Long time ago. But the one thing my bride at that time, she lived in the canyon. She lived at a golf club also. And the big thing was the Knudsen Mansion at Halloween time. This was the place where all the little kids would go because it looked very scary. But the people that owned it at the time were very good neighbors. But it was a place that, if you were a kid, you had to go to that house, and a lot of them didn't want to go because they weren't sure, what they would meet, whether it was Frankenstein or Dracula or whatever. But it's well known in the neighborhood, and it's almost a tourist attraction, and it's something that Chevy Chase, the estates, are very proud of. So I think it would be a good addition to the Glendale Register. It shows when people go to it, when we go on these tours and we go and visit these houses, you always find these people that they don't realize that Glendale has its own set of architecture. It's very important. They always think that, when they're going to come here, they're going to find barns or something else. But when they come and they see these houses, they go, I never knew Glendale had anything like that. But we have so many of those, and that's the great thing about the Glendale Register is when these are on there, we can point with pride. And this is one of those homes that this is what Glendale's all about. So, yes, as I've already said, I'm very much for the house. And I will now be quiet and listen to the rest of my commissioners.
Thank you, Mike. Who would like to go next?
I just have a little comment on what Jay said about the wall for the garage, looking at the brick. That's the style. It's not because they pushed out to make trophy, room for a trophy.
No, that's just, the brick is just thicker
Yeah,
and
thicker,
it's
but they
bumpy
did
and
that.
crazy looking.
Yeah. Because I thought that's a lot of trophies. No, it's just the bricks. That was it.
Okay. So it's not very, first of all, I want to thank the owners for your interest and for bringing the house forward for designation. It's not very often that we get to look at criterion 2, or as Jay said, that we have a property that rises to that level. I grew up here in Los Angeles as well, and so, yeah, Knudsen products were always in my house growing up. And again, I had no idea about, it was interesting to learn about Mrs. Knudsen as well, somewhat of a power couple of the time. I remember driving down San Vicente Boulevard as a child on the way to the beach, and the coral trees were just something that, we always noted. Aside from that, Jay, I had a couple of questions on this side of the house, this elevation.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said, we do have the plans from 1949 that look at the articulation of the, what are now sliding doors out onto balconies.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you said that at some point, probably outside of the period of significance, those changes were made,
Well,
creating balconies and
That-
putting in
that's-
sliding glass doors as opposed to windows?
Yeah, these changes were made at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I didn't focus, I wanted to bring them up here because I didn't have enough information to say one way or the other, and also based on the fact that it's eligible potentially under 2 criteria. I have to say that I think all of these balconies, they're definitely not part of the 1949 changes. Whether they were made by the Knudsen's before Mrs. Knudsen left the house in 1974, or they were made by subsequent owners, I can't say. They do look like they're in pretty good condition. Wood doesn't always look as good as this does over decades and decades. These spaces were created through things that the Knudsen's did. So we do know that this area on this photo was enclosed by the Knudsen's. Whether they put a deck above, I can't say. Same with these areas. This area we know didn't have this column and this projecting balcony. It had a much shallower kind of wall, kind of right in front of where the window would have been. And the same is true at some of the others. This photo shows this deck up here. And when I walked through, I could see both in the way the brick was cut and different things that this door was added. What I believe happened was that there was a window here, and you could see a difference in this lower section from the upper section. So I believe there would have been brick spanning here with a window infilling this opening, and they took that out and added a door, which is a fairly common thing to do. When that happened is the big question for me. And the same with this addition at the back of the house. This was built by the Knudsen's. It may have had a flat roof. It seems like a natural place to put a deck, but I don't know. In 1949, there wouldn't have been. I don't think there was access to this area. I think there was a window where the sliding door is now. So that's kind of a challenge I left for the commission to kind of ponder.
And then does it appear that that railing matches the other railing, so that it was probably all done at the same time?
I'm guessing they all have the same kind of spacing. It was done by someone who had some design sensibility in trying to work this into the look of the house. And yeah, to my mind, it's fairly successful, and we have had other houses where there are kind of major changes made, especially at rear facades, that haven't bothered the commission as much. They have bothered council, so I'm prepared for this to be an issue with council, and with your guidance, we'll be able to explain why. If you're inclined to accept it as it is, we'll explain why. If you're inclined to make changes, we'll explain that. One thing I forgot to mention was the wall at the front, because if you remember, we had the house on Vista Del Mar that was approved by the commission and denied by council. The denial started with the discussion about this non-conforming situation. In this case, we're lucky we have a variance, we have paperwork that shows us that the city approved a change in setback to allow this low wall to be built. To the best of my ability looking at it, I think that this wall dates to that time. It does look like it has some age to it, but not the same age as the house, obviously. So when we go to council, we'll be able to answer that question and say, well, this was definitely allowed by the city. In terms of these other changes, we'll have to see where they take it. But as we all know, the council could say that even if the commission says it's eligible under criterion 3, if they're concerned about that, they could still designate it under criterion 2, and it would have the same protections. So.
So for me personally, considering the high quality of the home and the beautiful design and the uniqueness of it, even if those changes were done during the period of the Knudsen's, like if the balconies were bumped out at some point, personally they don't seem to rise to the level of, maybe they're not as elegant as we might expect, but I know you just mentioned, Jay, that you don't have that much of an issue with it. So I'll just sort of put that out there as something to ponder. I don't know how my colleagues feel.
And we've also heard from the owner that they're open to a condition to replace these. That would be easier in this location where we know what was there. In these other areas where we don't know, all we know is that originally instead of this vertical picket kind of railing, there was horizontal siding.
Right.
And
no real balcony, like.
very shallow, if any. I think the window, it looks like the window was either right on top of that low wall, or but it looked like it had a thickness to it. It's a little, I couldn't. So that would only apply to really this one. These two upper balconies here, this balcony here, this other balcony up here. We've got a lot of balconies on this house. And there was one other. Did I have another? This is that the one up here? Yeah. So we don't know what was there, and that would diminish the the usability of the house that does have these nice outdoor spaces attached to it. So it's a bit of a conundrum. Yeah. You like that? Yeah.
Well, guess I'll stop there for now. Okay. See what your comments are.
So thank you for bringing this house before us. It was great to see the tour and see the beautiful property, and obviously read staff's report about the history in Knutson, which I was very familiar with as well from growing up here. I agree with the staff. On criterion 2, absolutely. Criterion 3, with the conditions that you've proposed, I would support the repair of the downspout as well as the change of the gas lamp. I think front on, the lamp doesn't look as bad as it does from the side because it protrudes from the house so far that it seems a little bit out of scale for what would have been there. The other conditions I'd like the commission to consider would be the sliding doors and kind of that area that we've been talking about, but also putting in the work plan, repairing the covered outdoor area where the barbecue is.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be in need of some maybe even structural repairs as well as a roof, and so I think that would be good even if we give a few years out to accomplish it. That would be good, I think, to have it on the work plan because it does seem to be a nice feature of the property and should probably be covered. I mean, covered in the conditions,
Right.
not
It's already
covered. It's already covered. But I had a question on the work plan. I noticed in the section, which I believe the work plan is prepared by the owner, then there was somewhere crossed off and said no after it.
Yeah, that was
Who's-
Jay Platt crossing the
Oh, that was
off.
your writing?
Yeah.
I was like, who's writing that?
That's Jay Platt, last minute, how everything goes. That was because what I thought was going to be the original proposal was to put French doors in, and I didn't think that was appropriate. And so I kind of wanted to leave this open for discussion. I could not
Okay.
come up with a solid decision on it, and I hate to say that, but it's true in this case. And
With the work plans written fairly openly, like replace 1949 sliding doors with doors more closely aligned with the original era of construction for the house.
right, and that's why
You would have it-
I wouldn't want the doors to reflect the 1929 period,
Right.
because that wouldn't be an accurate, that would be creating a false history for the house,
Okay.
which doesn't meet the standards. But doing something else there, or bringing it closer to what we do know of the 1949 appearance, at least in the link to the trophy room, would be appropriate
Yeah.
and clearly defensible. The bigger question is what to do, if anything, with the other balconies.
Yeah.
So it's very common, for example, in the one I mentioned up here, this is such a common change to go from a window to a door that generally wouldn't hinder any eligibility, bring up any eligibility issues. But some of the others, and then putting a deck on top of a flat roof also, but then we have this,
I think it's the
Sorry.
side along the driveway that looks the most
yeah.
out of place, especially with fake balconies that you have no access to. That's a little on the
No,
left side.
no, these are.
No, the left one, there's no access
Oh, you're right,
to.
this doesn't,
Right.
is there a door here?
No.
Okay, that's right. So, I think, and that could have been a design feature at some point also, to not just have a flat
A flat
roof
roof.
here.
Yeah.
Or maybe they intended to knock out the bottom area below the window.
Well, in absence of the information, and it obviously being an alteration that doesn't really fit well with the original style, should we just go forward under criterion 2? That's the question to
that's an
you
option
and my
also,
commissioners. Obviously, the house in its architectural style will still have the same protections, like you mentioned, under 2. But then we aren't designating it for its true, architecture significance and original qualities that are still there, and there's still quite a bit. that would be one option, I think, because that facade does present some problems in my mind that doesn't really fit the style. Especially
Yeah,
the
the-
double balcony, the
Which
fake
one?
balcony, the double balcony on the right. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, now, that would totally work, just designated under the one criterion that also anticipates issues that might arise at council. So that's a fairly safe route to take. Another would be to de-emphasize these balconies. One possibility that's just coming to mind now would be to restore this area to what we know it was in 1949, to possibly remove, we know that this was infilled and there was a roof put on it, remove this railing and let this notch remain as it was. Since this upper balcony is quite large and looks quite usable, one possible solution would be to pull this railing back so that if this were restored back to its original look, there would be some sort of flat cornice line across here, and then we would see a balcony railing pulled back so it's not as prominent, and possibly could be done with horizontal siding to echo what we know is the horizontal siding below. At the rear facade, I don't know that we want to introduce all kinds of horizontal
no.
stuff here. That's a lot of wood to
Yeah.
put on a Tudor, hence your conundrum. So,
So would wrought iron be something we could consider to make it less, I know we usually put wood timber on
Yeah,
a
I don't-
Tudor,
I'd keep it-
but
extensive
I would
wrought
keep it
iron
the
on
wood.
Tudors.
not back there, I mean on
Oh,
the
on the
other
front?
facade, just to make it a little more, for the upper level
Yeah.
maybe, and for the balcony over the door.
I'm sorry.
I think
To
the
give it
wood
a
is the right
lighter,
material. I just
Wood-
don't
feel.
think the way it was executed.
Right, it's a little
Is-
heavy.
I actually I like this design a lot for a Tudor house, and we'll keep it in mind
Yeah.
if we have issues come up on non-historic
The pattern of the
Tudors
railing.
where we're working with applicants. But part of it is this feels really cobbled together with just a
Yes.
4x4, and it's not the quality that you would expect for a property as nice as this. But the railing itself, that's why, I don't want to, it's the commission's decision in terms of which criteria to choose. Choosing only criterion 2 is the safer path, and I think we get everything that we look for. We also don't have a ton of properties designated that way, although we do have a few, including one that was changed by council, if I remember, on Cumberland. So that we definitely have done that before, and no reason not to. Part of what hurts a little bit is this house is just so nice in every other way.
Right.
but-
Yes.
So I wouldn't necessarily not want to designate it under criterion 3, because I think the changes that we're discussing right now are reversible, right? So it's a matter of, do we want to put conditions at this point in time to make some changes?
And just one note on that,
Or-
the Secretary of Standards, we usually, sometimes I'll just say, oh, this kind of meets that, or just as, but when we're really coming down to a decision, we wouldn't have, those are intended for new work on historic buildings rather than justifying old work. So in some ways, I think we have to look at the old work and say, hey, we can live with that, or we can't live with it, let's modify it, or change the designation.
Right, so at some level, do we leave it to a future owner to maybe come in and say, I want to change it back to how it was originally? Which is sort of what we try to do with non-contributors in a historic district,
Right.
is to get them back.
Well, and the owner has said that they need to do something with the sliding doors, at least those two. That doesn't fix all the balcony issues, but Jay, in working with him, you could suggest, that at least that lower one, that we bring that back to what shows in the
Yeah.
alteration plan.
That said, it would no longer be a sliding door. We're saying they would become sliding windows?
Yeah, this would become a window, and this balcony would get pushed all the way back and would turn into horizontal wood siding.
And that's the least usable balcony anyway. It's very
Doesn't look
narrow.
like
It's-
anyone's
you
out there.
can just stand out there, basically, was it.
Yeah, and I think, since this is a fairly prominent facade, treating this differently, if the commission were inclined to make changes there, and then, I'm sorry, I'm messing up with these. And then perhaps the balconies at the rear, which present more problems in terms of what's the right thing to do. Maybe those stand, and maybe this goes away. New door here, new window here. This projecting thing goes away. We fix that, and then possibly think about altering this upper balcony railing or this upper deck railing.
To match the one below, which would be horizontal.
Or perhaps to even keep it as it is, but just move it back so it were less prominent, but still had the openness. So it would reflect what we could say is, if we're doing this work here and here, we're restoring the property back to the Knudsen period. If we look at this area and say, let's assume this isn't Knudsen era, what we could do is diminish this change so it was less prominent on this facade. And then you can think about the rear balconies and see if you want to treat those differently.
Right.
That would definitely improve it. The rear balcony doesn't bother me as much. I think it was on top of the addition, which is very easily could have been done at the time. I mean, it's a great spot to be able to look out over that entire Aurora and mountains, and so it's possible it was a use, whether it was that exact balcony railing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think, the side facade that bothers me more, just because there's so many of them and kind of competing the ways they intersect the house at different planes. It's a little awkward.
Yeah, I don't know. We had a house on Cortez that was, or I'm sorry, on Rosmoyne that was brought forward several months ago that had extensive balconies, and that became a serious issue, but it had many other issues as well and didn't have the associative interest that this house does. So I think I understand if you went for a motion to kind of do restorative and just creating a better design here, restorative work here, and accept the balconies at the rear, that would be, I think the owners
Should we ask
suggest
bring the
that's,
owner back and ask?
if you want to reopen.
Yeah, let's do.
Yes.
Let's reopen the public session and we can get the owner's input.
Is it possible to withdraw our application for 3 and just go on 2? Would that give us more flexibility? In other words, just go with option 2, the historical option?
That's a possibility. You wouldn't, that would be something the commission could consider your interest in doing that. Even if you had nominated it just under 2, it's in the commission's purview to say, but this is a magnificent example, and so.
Okay.
Are the alteration, or I'm sorry, restorative effort that Jay was talking about, is that something you'd be willing to do?
Well, I guess what I'd be willing to do is, I don't know about functionally, but cosmetically. In other words, if you don't like wood, we'd be willing to go with steel or whatever it has to be. We actually use that for barbecuing.
Which one, this one?
Yeah, right there. Yeah, it's actually,
Oh. right
it's a
in the
focal
kitchen.
point in the kitchen. It flows out there. However, I heard what you said with wood, and we'd be willing to change the material.
That said, you also have a deck right here, which is also
We'd be
coming
willing
off
to
of the
change.
kitchen.
We'd be willing to change
You'd be willing to change?
all of the decks to
All-
the composition.
Let me recap
Yeah,
for you, Mr. Avery, what the commission is considering. In this area, we would restore this back to what we see in the 1949 drawing. So this would turn into a large window that would be about 5 feet tall, and then the area below the window would be in plane with that window, so you wouldn't have this projecting balcony, and you'd have horizontal wood siding painted this color, which is quite nice. This railing up here that seems fairly useless would just go away.
Okay.
And you've already said you want to replace this door. So,
Yes.
and what we would do is probably replace it with something similar because we think there was a large glassy door there.
Is that okay?
She can come up and.
This is my dear wife right here.
Yeah.
Come up and
She's
introduce
welcome to come
yourself.
up and be a part of it.
Esty Avery. I am concerned about doing away with all the railings, I guess, and pushing all that back. I guess I'd like to see what you propose exactly, because it seems like we would lose space.
Well, this area
So
up
that's
here,
good.
you don't have space.
That's fine.
This area, we'd probably push this back maybe 3 feet, so the railing would come here rather than go all the way to the edge here.
I have-
And then this, you would lose this balcony, and this would become a window instead of a door.
So you're not losing any interior space. It would just be the balcony, the lower balcony, and a few feet or 2 feet or whatever on the one right above it.
As far as on the right, pushing that back, that's acceptable.
On the lower or on the
No,
top,
on
upper?
the top, right
Okay.
there.
Okay.
That
Pushing
one?
that back, and that's acceptable.
Okay. What about the right below it? Putting it back to the window?
I would ask that we don't, because we actually use that balcony. However, we would be willing to change the composition. In other words, if you wanted steel, metal, whatever you would like, to get rid of, you keep talking about the 4x4, let's get rid of that.
Oh,
Well, you need
Well,
something there, or you're
if you
gonna
keep the
have a
balcony,
huge
we kind of
project.
need the 4x4.
Yeah.
Well, what, or some
Yeah, yeah.
metal, some
No, it's not the material, it's more the, it jutting out from the facade. So if you're needing the balcony and not willing to change it, then
You'd have to do serious structural work
Yeah.
here to get rid of that column, and I doubt you want to go to that expense.
oh, to
and-
cantilever it up.
Yeah.
Probably don't want to.
I guess it would depend on how much it would be.
Right.
You know what I mean? If you're saying $20,000, yeah, we'll do it.
Well, we're not saying anything
Yeah.
money-wise.
Okay. Just-
Look at this, wait.
Well, I think you've given the
Okay.
commission some food for thought in terms of whether they want to put this under the architecture criterion as well as the association.
As far as the gas lamp goes, I sent Jay some materials. A designer actually picked that size as the smallest one that they have. There are some thermodynamic realities because you have to dissipate heat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not an electric lamp. And the
Yeah.
point is you've got that gas running and it heats up, and you've got to have something that can hold the heat.
Okay.
People walk by and smile when they see it. I think it adds so much to the house. People actually look at it. And I think it fits the, Tudor. It's a London Steep Street lamp. And I think it actually fits the house completely.
There wasn't a gas line here originally. You added the gas line, right? Okay.
Okay, any other questions for them?
No, not at this moment.
You mentioned the pavilion.
Yes.
We're going to replace that, but that's going to cost a lot of money.
In how many years would you prefer us give you in the work plan if it's part of the conditions?
Is it in there for 3
or 5.
It's in here for 2022.
Yeah, we'll do it.
22?
We have the
Okay,
cash, but we'll do it.
okay,
But it's going to be expensive.
okay.
We want to be good stewards of that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate that, yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll close the public session. Okay, so with that information, where does that leave us?
Well, if you could read back exactly what we,
So maybe we
so
can
far?
talk back through each point, because we need to talk about the lamp as well.
Okay, we have Chair Shire said she agreed with the staff condition about the downspout replacement. I assume that's universal.
yes.
She also believed that the gas lamp needed to be replaced. Commissioner Morgan felt that the gas lamp was okay, and we haven't heard from our 2 other commissioners on that. In terms of the changes at the side, one option is to not designate under the architecture criterion, and I'm having a lot of trouble
Well,
today.
before we move there, can we just get them to weigh in on the light
Those two,
fixture
sure,
so we
mhm.
can go one at a time?
Sure, yeah.
Downspouts a yes for everybody.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
okay with
The
the
lamp.
downspout. I don't have concerns about the gas lamp.
Me neither.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
go,
I think it's fine.
it is. I mean,
It looks
like they
really
say,
cool.
people walk by and it,
Yeah, I think it looks cool.
I mean, considering the other things we're thinking about, I'm not
Okay, Jay, now you
focusing on the
can, now you
gas
can
lamp.
move on.
Okay. We, If we are nominating under the architecture criterion, the commission expressed concern about this side facade and not about the rear facade. If we were going to make changes here, staff recommends that you consider restoring this location to the 1949 drawing, restoring this area to the best that we know, which is the infilled porch area without a railing on top. The commission might want to express some interest in whether you think it's appropriate to have large sliding glass doors here or to have doors that may not be as glassy as that. And then the third would be to maintain this railing so that it matches the other railings at the top level here, but pull it back several feet so that it isn't as prominent when you're looking at it, and lets this volume read closer to the original 1949 appearance.
Sorry, Jay, I have a quick question. We keep referencing the 1949 sliding doors, but I know
Yeah,
the sliding doors on the right were sliding windows.
yeah. If I'm referencing these doors as this would turn into a window. This was added as doors.
As sliding doors in 1949?
No,
That's just what
this
I'm
came
getting at.
later, if I remember.
Well, on the plans, there is a sliding door. It's a sliding door to entry. So
Yeah.
that was, in fact, an element of the
1949.
1949.
Was that in the 1949? I thought I had
Let me
it
read.
later.
It's the plans you gave us. What date were those? I'm trying to find the date. Oh, yeah, 49.
Yeah, 7/18/49.
So there was, it says sliding door to entry.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Okay, so that might have been
So we're replacing sliding doors.
a
with-
true feature from
Yes,
the
from 49.
1949 changes.
Right.
I think they might not be the same doors they were saying,
No,
but
no,
still
right,
sliding
understood.
elements.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
The doors upstairs are definitely aluminum sliders that wouldn't have been made then.
Yeah.
My memory, and maybe the Averys can nod in agreement, is that these doors down here, are these heavier steel doors? Do you remember? Do these look different than these doors or the same? They're the same? You just nod in agreement.
Oh, I'm sorry, they're all the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, this is, a little bit of speculation has to happen here.
Okay. So if we remove the balcony above the sliders, the balcony that isn't really a balcony, above the sliders at the top of the stairs,
I would,
Jay, you feel comfortable that that
well,
could be
this
removed
one just maybe get rid of.
and it would be fine,
Yeah.
I mean, when we're doing that?
Yeah, it would open up more brick to visibility. This window would be visible.
Okay, so just a flat roof and that's okay. Well, it is right now.
Yeah.
And then pull back,
This
pull
guy.
back that one. And we would keep the same pattern of the wood then?
I would
Yeah.
think it matches this deck connects to that other deck,
Yeah.
I
if you
remember,
wanted to.
or it's visible from it, so.
So would we feel comfortable then that if we remove the balcony, the non-functional balcony above the main entrance sliders and then pulled back the balcony that kept the pattern to match the balcony below and then leave the balcony below because the owners appear to be utilizing it? Would we feel comfortable with those changes? Or would we want to go back to what was there in 1949?
Solomon might like that one, so splitting the baby.
Yeah, totally.
I think at this point, we may
I'm-
need a motion.
I'm sort of
and
putting that
see-
out there to
Well,
see if there's any, if
I
there are
don't
thoughts.
know that that's going to help in the design of the facade, meaning now the top balcony is going to be recessed more, accentuating the bottom balcony sticking out further. And I think we may I think it might be a worse result.
A wedding cake action.
Well, yeah.
I- If the commission wants to think strategically about where this may go in the current climate at city council, that can also influence your decision-making, so.
Then we're safer with number 2.
Not necessarily. Well, I
Well,
don't think we should
No,
take any
yeah.
votes on that right now, but, so,
Well, should we start with the motion? Does someone want to start there and see
That
how we vote?
sometimes helps.
Does anyone like to make a motion?
no,
I'm not sure what I'm.
Not yet?
So,
thinking.
Okay, we'll give you more.
So, sorry, let me get the motion. Okay, so I would move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommend to the City Council that the property at 3030 Edgewick Drive to be called the Knutson House, after its historically significant initial occupants, be designated as a historic resource in the Glendale Register of Historic Resources, and that the HPC recommend that the City Council authorize the city manager to enter into a Mills Act contract with the property owners for property tax savings, and that the conditions be added that the disconnected downspout at the rear facade is to be repaired, that the balcony above the entrance at the top of the stairwell on the, is that the east facade? South facade?
South, I think.
On the south facade, that's correct, be removed.
This railing here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That the balcony railing adjacent to the trophy room be moved back
The second level.
at the second level to be recessed, I guess, is what we're saying. And that the balcony, the lower level balcony, be returned to its original 1949 condition with sliding windows and horizontal wood siding.
which one's that again? Can you
That's the
point to it?
lower one, which would return to the appearance we see here with a large window spanning the opening and tongue and groove siding below.
Okay, and that the wood garden pavilion be rehabilitated at some future point. Sorry?
Is there a second? Oh, sorry. Is there a second?
Can I ask a question before there's a second?
Yeah. Ask.
Or do we need a second before your question?
No.
Well,
It's,
Technically.
or technically, you can't ask the question. We
Yeah,
need a
motion's
second.
in play.
On the table. So is there a second to the
although I
motion?
think you can,
Hold for a minute? Move it to the side?
not that Robert's rules don't apply here, but let's be real. Yeah, I think we can answer a question if we need to.
Okay,
Now that I've heard all that, or can I,
you may ask a question.
now that I've heard clarification of what you're all proposing, the top is on the right, it's been recessed. No, leave that slide right there. Oh, I'm sorry.
This one.
And then we'll see wood paneling there that will be flush with the wall, so we won't have the wedding cake appearance.
Right. This,
You will slightly, but not as
Not
dramatically.
as prominent.
Yes,
With the top recessed, the bottom more flush, and the left removed.
they'll all be basically
Yeah.
moving back.
what you would, this will be in plane with the existing door. So let's push that back.
Push that back.
And then this volume will be more expressed, so
With
you'll
the
have a
house
flat roof here, and then this railing will be less prominent when it's pushed back.
Okay. Another side removed.
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
With that clarification, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan?
You get to go first.
I know. My only concern, I know, I know,
This is a yes or no, or
yeah,
yay or nay?
yes.
It's not, we can entertain several motions if we need to work this
You
out.
got a yes from Morgan.
We got a, oh, shut up. And Chair Shire.
Yes.
All right, so vote 4-0 to approve under criteria 2 and
Wait.
3.
You have to roll call the rest.
Oh.
They motioned in second, but they didn't
Oh, you're
give their
right.
vote.
It's Commissioner Votanian,
Yes.
Commissioner Doom.
Yes.
Okay, well,
It's been a long week for you, Jay.
so motion to approve, or approval, vote to approve, designated under criteria 2 and 3. Recommend the Mills Act contract with added conditions regarding fixing the downspout, replacing the railing above the south entrance, setting back the balcony railing at the second level, and returning the lower balcony to its 1949 condition, and rehabilitating the garden pavilion. What we also need is a decision on the timeline to do that.
Why don't we give them to the furthest out, the 2022, for all the work? That way they can spread it out as they need to.
All right,
Does
very
that work
good.
for?
Yeah.
That's fine.
And just so that the Averys understand, since there's some, you may still have some questions, this is a recommendation to the city council. So depending on how you feel about these things, you can bring up issues at council. I don't necessarily recommend it because it could get into other things that you wouldn't expect, but this is a recommendation, so. If we can't do that, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, it's in the report as road.
Oh, good.
oh, agenda
Oh.
says drive, sorry.
Okay.
We'll fix that in the
Yeah,
agenda.
we will
I
definitely
read
fix
the
that.
agenda. Roads.
Not the first time that mistake's been made. All right,
All
very
right,
good.
so next on the agenda is 7B. Congratulations.
Thank
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, 7B item is 107 North Columbus Street. Is that correct? Street?
Avenue.
What? Okay, the agenda's wrong again. Avenue. This is for advisory design review of proposed balcony enclosures.
Oh, see, I was clever here. I didn't go either
You
way.
left it off.
Didn't do that on purpose, but
I should have
whatever.
just skipped over it on the agenda.
Okay, this is
It's okay.
this is an advisory design review hearing, and this is an issue that's coming to you because this 1925 grouping of apartment buildings, a small apartment complex in the Mediterranean Revival style, very intact, with a lot of original features, was identified in the South Glendale Historic Resource Survey as potentially eligible for the Glendale Register. So before staff approves work on a property that's eligible for the register, we look to see if that work could have any impact on eliminating its ongoing eligibility for the register. It's similar but somewhat different from our review, obviously, for a designated building where we know where it stands. Because in this case, we have a proposal. I'll just get to the proposal. Here's the property on Columbus. It's 3 buildings, 2 fourplexes facing Columbus Street to the east, and then a longer bar-shaped building at the rear that has garages below. You can see the parking lot here, as well as apartments above. And then it has kind of a landscaped courtyard between the buildings and a landscaped walkway. And you can't help but notice the, where'd it go? I didn't get it in the pictures yet. There's a beautiful little arch spanning the opening, and we'll see that in a minute. Yeah, you can sort of see it. And the building was called Graceland. We don't know for sure that that's its 1925 name, but it's a lovely name, and it's still there, and I believe the owner is very happy to keep this property named such. It's in new ownership. I can vouch that the building is being taken care of and is appreciated for its historic character. It has all of its, I believe almost, if not all, almost all windows are original. It's intended for those to remain. All other features would remain. The issue before you tonight is a question about these front-facing balconies at the second floor. This balcony to the north was infilled with glazed, wood and glass windows at some point, and I don't believe I have that date. And the owner may, when she comes up, may be able to give you that date. I don't think I had it easily found when I wrote the design memo. The question before you is whether it would be acceptable for the 3 other balconies facing the street to be infilled. The owner will discuss her reasons for wanting to do this. A large part of it is noise mitigation from the car wash across the street. But we're looking at this solely as a design issue and an issue of whether this work would remove the ongoing eligibility of this building from the Glendale Register. So here's a close-up view of an existing opening. Notable features, just plain punched openings in the stucco. We have these quarter-round corners, and then we have wood sills spanning the base of the opening. You can see the work that was done here follows the windows have the 90-degree curves, and the sills were kept in place. The proposal is to infill these in the same manner that these were infilled so that we're keeping those features. Here's a drawing of the new wood windows that are proposed. There's some question. When I wrote the staff report, I specifically thought, I'm sorry, I'm pretty jumbled tonight. The proposal calls for the removal of the existing wood in this opening here and installing new wood so that there's consistency across. The original proposal we received called for also that each light of these windows, as you can see in the drawing, would be single pane light. My recommendation in the staff report is to keep the configuration of these windows so that each window would have 2 lights with a horizontal muntin, and also to keep this existing window in place and then match that with the other windows rather than removing this and replacing all of the other windows. You can see here the proposal. Here's the existing to be removed. Here are the 3 to be infilled, and then this would be the proposal to infill all 4 of them. The owner can talk, and the window consultant is here also. They can talk about what the options are for that. And then here are the elevations showing the infilled windows, basically this condition being replicated across the front. This is a somewhat complicated Secretary of the Interior analysis here because, and all analyses under the standards are somewhat complicated because there's no rule. You don't have to meet all 10 standards. Only 3 of the standards really apply to this project. I believe it does meet 2 of them, and less so meets the 3rd. And that's the open question. That's why it's here. If I could have made a decision that this easily meets the Secretary's standards, I believe we wouldn't be talking about this. But it's also here because I believe that if this work is done, this property will still be eligible for the Glendale Register. And when the survey team came through, they noted that the individual window, or the individual balcony here was infilled. And I think this is such a strong building that I think that anyone looking at this, even if all 4 of them had been infilled, would probably still feel that way. And this does raise some questions in terms of our survey methodology. If you think back to when we were looking at the early Craftsman properties and the infilled porches on the Craftsman, I see this as a very different animal than the infilled Craftsman porches for a couple of reasons. One, there's not, I can't say that a recessed second floor balcony is a character-defining feature of Mediterranean revival multifamily residential properties of the 1920s. I can say that an open porch is perhaps, if not the first, then the second key character-defining feature of Craftsman architecture. The other reason I see a difference is because this is literally infilling an opening that's there. I've seen very few Craftsman houses and none that were kind of in discussion when we were looking at the early ones in Glendale, where the infill didn't actually remove historic features and damage the historic character. The other issue of those Craftsmen is we don't know what happens behind that opening. We don't know if there's an original window that was removed, if there was a door put in, or anything like that. So in my analysis, I felt that this does meet standard 10 because it's highly reversible, more easily reversible than most changes to historic buildings. I think it does meet standard 2 because no historic materials are being removed. In fact, the existing sills are staying in place and the new windows will be placed above those. And that also helps with standard 10 in terms of the reversibility. But standard 9 says that new additions, exterior alterations, which is what we'll look at this as, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. I think that part we do meet. It's the new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features. And that's where we run into a little problem because we're losing a feature here. We're losing these open balconies. And that's a big decision maker or a point that the commission will need to consider. And one final point I want to raise for the commission is something that kind of dawned on me a little late in the process, so I don't have an answer. But if the commission is inclined to say that this work is appropriate and may move forward, then we're going to let this work happen at staff level. If the commission says it does not think this is appropriate, then we're going to take this to the design review board if the applicant still wants to move forward with the proposal, with your comments being forwarded to the board. The issue for me is if you did approve this and we enclose these balconies, suddenly this window and this door, and you can, I'm sorry I don't have a better picture, but you can see the shadows of this multi-light French door, these suddenly become interior features and could therefore be removed. And I've spoken with the owner about that. It's not her intention to remove these things, but future owners may feel differently about it. And I think it would be a shame to let this project allow the removal of intact original features that are there today and we know are there. What I'm recommending in the staff report is that I explore with the city attorney what sort of covenants could be placed on the property to call out these windows as historic features, and I don't even know if this is possible. But as far as I understand, you can put covenants on things that cover a lot of things, and they're powerful tools. So if you were inclined to approve, we would make sure that that was feasible. If it weren't feasible, I would bring it back to the commission so that you would understand the ramification of the enclosure of the balcony leading to this possible future change. Even with all of that said, you know, losing these windows would be bad because this property is really intact. And so again, we have, is this a conundrum? I'm not sure, but it's somewhat complicated. And I leave it up to the people testifying and then to your deliberation.
Okay. So with that, we'll open the public hearing. The first speaker we have is Amanda Freeman.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for your time and your attention to this. My husband and I have purchased the building on the 14th of September, and it is our intention, and we love old buildings, to keep it authentic and just to modernize it. It was owned by the same family since 1930, and the good news is that they did nothing, but it's also the bad news. It's needed everything, electrical, drains, plumbing, and we've done so very carefully while keeping all of the original touches. In terms of protecting the interior windows, absolutely. I am in favor of everything that will keep that as historic as it is. And the reason that we want to do the balcony enclosures are the noise, but also just to show you the railing
You have to stay near the microphone.
The railing is this tall. That's it.
How tall is that?
How many inches?
27 inches. So it's not really very safe. You could easily fall overboard. And it encourages you to sort of sit on it because it's, just at seating height. I don't really think it's particularly safe. The other thing is, yes, the car wash is extremely noisy. The car wash was given a license with some mitigation, which I believe that they've been doing, but unfortunately, the noise level when the cars are going through the car wash is 100 dB in various bursts. In residential areas, it should never be any higher than 50 dB. In industrial areas, they allow 70 dB, but 100 is really very, very loud. And it's directly across the street from these balconies. Nobody uses them because it's just too noisy. You can't enjoy it during the hours of the car wash, which is 8 to 6 every single day. So those are the two reasons that we feel that it's very important to put the windows in. I'm flexible and about what the windows look like. I do believe, I thank you for your input on the windows. And also, I'm also in favor of doing the cross posts and keeping the one original window. It was actually put in before 1946. I have the paperwork if you'd like to see it. We don't know exactly the date, but it was in the first 20 years of the building being built. And it could have been fairly immediate. There are no, as much as I've looked for any paperwork on this building, any drawings, any history, there just is nothing. It just sort of appears in 1946, although it was built in 1925.
So I'm sorry, you said the one set of infill windows is from 1946?
It was before 1946, somewhere in that 20 years. I have the paperwork where it says that it, would you like to see it?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It just makes a reference to it in this. I mean, there are maybe 5 or 6 documents about this building altogether.
Amanda,
Is
can we
this in
keep that?
Yes.
Okay.
Is this in
of
permit
course.
documentation, or where did you find this?
That came from the assessor's office. Yeah. But there isn't, usually, because my husband and I have a few other old buildings, 1920s bungalow courts, usually you can find some original drawings. There's nothing on this building. I've been looking and looking and looking.
Oh, you are in Glendale, not Pasadena. So.
Yes.
And the city doesn't have them because for multi-tenant,
No, they don't have anything.
We have
Would it?
almost no drawings for anything from back in the day.
Yeah.
There's actually a building around the
20 brands from 27.
But we have
Because
some
it's
things, but
yeah.
it's kind of hit or miss. So.
And where was the noise measured from?
The second floor balcony, the one that's
Further south?
furthest on that side.
The
But it's
Far
probably,
left here,
yeah, that one. Not at the end, but in the middle.
this one.
No, that one right there. That's where it was measured from. I have the noise report if you'd like to have a copy of it.
I think it's fine.
It was done by a acoustic engineer that's certified.
And so your intent is that the balcony is just going to be a small room, yet the window and door
It's
would
just
stay?
the window and door will stay. It'll just be an enclosed room like the existing enclosed balcony. And it will be fully removable.
Fully removable?
It will be removable.
You can,
Take it out.
Not by you each day, but she means
No.
if we
Yeah.
ever wanted,
But I mean, if there was
if we
a,
ever wanted to go back to the original, they could remove it.
When we look,
Removable.
Secretary of
And repair,
Secretary
obviously.
Standard 10 says that the work can be removed in the future and it will be returned to its previous appearance. So that's reversible for us.
in the, oh, go ahead.
No.
In the enclosed one, the northernmost one, are the door and the window on the other side still
Yes.
in place? Everything's still in
Everything's
place? So that
still-
would basically be the type for all the other ones?
absolutely.
Okay. And Jay, have you gone inside and seen the one that is,
I can't remember.
The
I don't
northernmost
think we
one?
walked into that. I've seen 2 of the units. I didn't bring a picture. The units have one of the most amazing features I've ever seen, which in the kitchens, you have these cabinets that have kind of a craftsman H-shaped pattern that's a real classic-looking craftsman thing. And those are cabinet doors and then a panel between these doors. But what happens is when you pull on the H's, they pull down and turn into legs for a bench. So you have two benches that fold out of the wall, and then you have a table that folds out. So you have a little dining area in the kitchen that when you're done, you can just push it back,
So
and it looks
cute.
like cabinetry. So it's pretty cool.
Welcome to
keeping all of
practical
that.
Glendale.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think, Amanda, we didn't go into this unit, if I remember.
No, we didn't go into that unit.
Just a quick question. Oh, sorry, did you have one? Go ahead. So I understand your desire to probably offer some protection to your tenants from the noise, but then it looks like the folks on the lower level obviously will not be getting any protections.
Well, I actually did a lot of research about what you could do with foliage because you're not allowed to do any low fences. And I've planted some very thick, bushy plants that will help a lot. There's only so much you can do, but I think that the plants will help a lot.
That
The
answers my
other
question.
thing that I neglected to mention is that regardless of whether you approve this or if this goes to the DRB, and if the DRB then approves it, this will be adding floor area to the property. It's such a small amount for a multifamily that I don't think there will be any issue, but we will have to verify that. We didn't have all the dimensions we would need to make the calculation. But that would be done before anything is approved. So.
My first question is, when you add the windows, what do you anticipate the noise reduction level to be inside?
I think it will cut it down a lot. I'm going to have Kenny Tashman speak to you on that, how much he thinks it'll reduce the sound, but it should reduce it a lot.
Okay. And then when you purchase it, the current tenants are still there?
No, they're not. We've had to do a major, major renovation. There's nobody that could live there at the time because we have to take all the walls out to change all the wiring. There were 2 electrical fires in the property before we owned it, and the sewer lines were leaking into the walls. When we took the pipes out of the walls where the sewers were, they fell apart.
They're from
And
25.
I mean, there were stains and active leaks in the walls. It wasn't habitable the way it is.
So there was no one living there when you purchased it?
No, there were people living there, but they are no longer living there.
Okay. What was the outside used for? Was it like storage if no one was out there?
It was empty.
It was
They
empty.
didn't have any furniture out there. I mean, it wasn't something that was desirable to sit out there because of the noise. All the tenants that were there when we bought the building complained about the sound. And one of them, the one that was in the very end unit, actively pursued the code enforcement for a couple of years trying to get them to do something
Okay.
about it.
And then what do you anticipate, just an outdoor enclosed balcony, room, patio, when you put the windows in to be used for? Sit out there?
Well,
and
you
look
can
at-
sit out there, you could use it as a home office, you could have dinner out there, just as some outdoor light space. People would use it however they wanted to use it. It's nice to sit outside. Wherever I design space, I always try to make people want to go out into the environment, and I think a glassed-in porch has a very nice compromise for that.
Do you know when the car wash was built?
I think in the 80s. It's been there
that
for
late.
quite a long time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I was wondering if the enclosure was due because the car wash originally some time ago, but no.
No,
No,
it's
it's
something that
Yeah,
happens
from
to
the 40s,
balconies
so I was wondering
all
why
over the
they're
place. So,
Then I was just curious why they would enclose one and not the other.
right.
I don't know. I wish I had more information about the building, but I don't even know who really built it. It would be fun to find out.
And then the last question, the one that is enclosed, the door and window have been removed? Interior?
No, it's still
No,
there.
you
Still
can
there.
see them.
It's
still there.
exactly.
You can see the transom of the window here. The verticals of the transom are there. And you can't see the door, but it's
No,
there.
but I mean the entryway.
The interior.
The interior still has a door and window back
Yeah,
there.
that's I'm trying to show you. In this opening, when you look through this opening, you can see the transom of the window behind.
So they had not been changed. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
No, it's nice to have both features. I mean, it really is. There's
All right.
really no compelling reason why you'd want to take the windows out. They're very beautiful, the interior windows and door.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker card is Tony Whitmarsh.
I'm okay.
No need to?
I was
Okay.
just here assisting Amanda.
Okay, great. Next is Ken Tashman.
So I do see that right there. Yeah. That's the door.
Hi, Ken Tashman.
Hi.
I was just going to offer my assistance in explaining any questions you might have towards the windows and the soundproofing aspect of it as well. My company is Tashman Home Center. We do historic renovations of windows and doors and also soundproofing of windows. The particular case here, the noise is extreme. I do lots of soundproofing as well as the renovations, but I would say you have to leave those interior windows there also, because if not, you won't get the soundproofing benefit. So you want to keep that door there and that window there, because it'll cut the noise on the interior living room probably close to 60 to 70%. On the balcony, it'll probably close, if you're just sitting on the balcony, it's 30 to 40% reduction in the noise just like from the balcony, but the effect of the closing of the balcony makes the living room now a lot more comfortable to sit in. And when I was there, it was extremely loud from that car wash.
So in the room that's enclosed right now,
Yeah,
when you close the windows, it's reduced 30 to 40% just on the outside?
just from the
whole
outside.
space?
Yeah.
And then what's it reduced on the
Once you go into the
interior?
living room,
It's reduced
to probably closer to 60 to 70%.
70%.
Because in essence, you're making a giant insulated window, in a sense, a space with the air cuts the noise going into the living room, and that's where the real living space is, and that's where it's really loud. It's inside the house.
And those are the old windows that are providing that much reduction. If Jay suggests we use the same windows on all four,
Well, no, I wasn't in the unit that has the windows now. I was in the units that don't have the windows.
okay.
And that one, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is. I'm upgrading the glass a little bit to give it better noise performance while maintaining the original look.
So you have not been in the unit with the windows to see how its sound is different in there?
I
how it's
have
less-
not,
less-
but I'm sure, just from my experience of doing it, it's a big difference,
Okay.
even with the old windows.
And one of the original proposal called for double glazed windows, which are the units that are fairly thick. It's hard to do those, and Mr. Tashman can answer, but with these narrow muntins, it's hard to support the weight of those. And I believe that Tashmans are putting together using laminated glass,
Yeah, which
has
is a better performance anyway
better
than double glazed windows.
sound performance.
For sound.
Okay.
For sound.
Okay, any other questions?
No?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker card, Catherine Yurka.
Good evening, Chair Shire and members of the Historic Preservation Commission. My name is Kathy Yurka, and I'm here on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. I'm glad to see this project being brought to you for your recommendation. I think there are really two questions before you. The first is, would the project to enclose the 3 other balconies compromise the property's eligibility for the Glendale Register? And I think there is good reason to think that it would. The balconies are important character-defining features that allow other character-defining features to be seen, the windows and doors. Commissioner Morgan had to ask whether there is a window and a door still behind the unit that has the enclosed porch. Enclosing the balconies would certainly alter the historic character of the building. We know that HRG, at least one consultant, is not a fan of enclosures, even ones that were likely done shortly after the buildings were constructed rather than 100 years later. And this is true even for enclosures that also feature the reversible addition of windows. And I'm thinking of the 1902 Transitional Craftsman at 405 Concord, or where you can still see the original window through the enclosure, and not just the window, but the exterior, and that is the Vernacular Cottage from 1908 at 137 South Jackson. Both were found ineligible despite TGHS's advocacy. Those cases aren't exactly the same, but they're analogous. And I found it doubtful that HRG would have found this eligible if all of the balconies had been enclosed, given what we know about their restrictive criteria. And it's easy to imagine a consultant in the future arguing that recent enclosures would disqualify these buildings as historic resources. The other separate question is whether the work meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. Graceland is recognized as a historic resource by the city, and proposed work should conform to the standards. The staff report notes that it deviates from the goals of Standard 2. We would put it more strongly. It does not comply with Standard 2. Quote, "The historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided." The staff report states that despite the deviation from Standard 2, the project is in overall conformance with the Secretary's standards. And we've said this again, there's no overall conformance if it does not conform with all 10. And I've given you an email from Francesca Smith, a qualified architectural historian with more information. And she also thinks that the enclosures, we should assume that it would disqualify it as a historic resource. I walked almost every block in South Glendale myself during the summer and fall of 2017. And I saw fourplex after fourplex after fourplex that had been altered to the point that it was not eligible for the register. This is a very special property, and I commend the owners for wanting to maintain the historic features. But those upper level balconies are important historic features. And it sounds as though the plantings are now going to be blocking the lower openings. So I think they become even more important. I understand the issue about the height of them, but you can put a simple railing up in order to make them safer. I hope you'll recommend against the changes, although I understand the issue with the noise, and encourage the owner to restore the property and apply for the Mills Act, the Glendale Register and Mills Act. The property, as you know, sold recently. The Mills Act savings would be probably something on the order of about $17,000 a year, so they're substantial. And I do think the balcony enclosures, if nothing else, would not make it an appropriate candidate for the Mills Act in the future. So I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing.
Make
And
a request
yeah.
for a 5-minute recess before we go into deliberations.
Fine.
Otherwise, I don't think I'll be able to concentrate.
Good idea.
Okay, we're going to recess for 5 minutes
Yay.
and come back. Okay, after a short recess, we're rejoining the Historic Preservation Commission, and we are discussing agenda item 7B, which is 107 North Columbus. We're doing commissioners' comments. Commissioner Morgan, would you like to start?
I'll continue. I'll start. Well, I have both pros and cons. So the pros are the alteration and easily reversible, which is number 10 that they've listed. The thing. No historic materials would be destroyed, and the windows differentiated from the others due to a single light. The cons, which are very important, they alter the historic appearance of open balcony, a character-defining feature. The infill makes the balcony inside of the house, changing the architectural appearance. The side windows are also going to be changed. What were the outside doors, now inside doors, which could be eliminated, which is, they've indicated that they won't eliminate them. Increasing the interior square footage, is it appropriate? And for me, one of the things is it's no longer balanced. All of the enclosed balconies make it look entirely different than what is originally intended. You know, I have this conundrum on what the applicant has said, which I find is very important. I am concerned about the 27-inch, you know, I mean, I don't know, today you couldn't have set 27 inches, and how does that get away with that today on the railing?
It's a non-conforming condition, so it's allowed unless someone proposes to make a change. The applicant's making a change on the rear, the back The back building, I don't have a picture of it, but has a long, low railing across the entire width of that building. And they're adding, and it's on their drawings, but it's not something you're considering tonight, they're adding a secondary railing that will sit behind. Here's the low railing, and they'll add a new railing that will run behind it. If someone wanted to make a safety change here, what I would probably recommend is a very simple, railing, kind of spanning these openings that would bring it up to the 42-inch height. Building and safety has issues with the size of that opening. I'd love to see it just be one single round, rail, but you have to have 4-inch gap. You can't have more than a 4-inch gap, and this would be more than 4. So that could be resolved if they needed to, but that's not our issue tonight. So.
Right. My only other thing is, if all things being considered in the way it is today, if they were to bring it in front of the HPC, would we allow the windows to be there? I mean, it seems to me that the HPC would say, well, no, those windows have to be removed to make it.
I expected the same thing. I saw that if this came forward with this owner or a future owner, and a condition would be to remove the windows. So,
I mean, for me, if we allow it, and I understand the reasons why to allow it. I mean, you have to have livability. It's one of the things that I wrote in the notes here. You're basically writing it off. It's no longer historically viable. It's just a long, and nothing, no offense, but it's basically a rectangular building. It's no longer, it loses its context and place in Glendale history. So it's, what do you choose, historic viability or livability? So that's my conundrum at this moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is also challenging for me, and I want to thank you for what you're doing, investing in historic properties and being a good custodian. We need more of that, and I really appreciate, obviously, whoever owned the building since 1930 took very good care of it and was very interested in its preservation. I have so many things, so many thoughts. So let me see where I'm going to start. Definitely the pattern of doors and windows and the openings at the lower and upper levels give a sense of visual symmetry to the building, and there is a very harmonious articulation of all of the elements on the facade. I think, and again, I don't need to point out, but the recessed front porches on the first level are balanced by the recessed balconies at the second level. The openings at the openings facing the street and at the sides of each balcony provide light and air, and they provide an outdoor space. The sense of interior and exterior, and we clearly don't have enough outdoor space in South Glendale, particularly somewhere for people to feel like they can get out of their four walls. And I think the concept would have also been important in 1925. As was mentioned by one of the speakers, or probably our only speaker, the open balconies also allow other features to be seen, such as the existing doors and windows on the balconies. For me, another one of the issues, and again, I think enclosing the balconies will materially and visually change the character of the building, and I do believe it does deviate from the goals of Standard 2, as was stated, that the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved, the removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. I think the other issue that was also mentioned in the report, Jay, that we haven't really, well, I think you did talk about it, the fact that once we enclose these balconies, then we run into a zoning code issue where we lose purview over or protection of the doors and windows, we lose that. And the current owner has stated that they have no intention of doing anything or making any changes. But again, we don't know what future owners might want to do. And I don't know, the enforceability of covenants has been a really difficult question.
That's open.
Yeah. I don't want to say especially in Glendale, but in my experience and even within the boundaries of the historic district within which I live, it's a very, enforceability is a very difficult thing to maintain. So, at some level, and again, I do also appreciate that, that there is this noise issue, but it does sound like at some level that is that's another enforcement issue that is sort of outside of what we're looking at. In other words, if that car wash has certain requirements that they're supposed to meet, and those requirements are not being met, that's also an enforcement issue that the owners could perhaps try to deal with the city. I think for me, it would be my preference not to enclose the balconies. Again, it's such an exemplary example of pre-World War II multifamily residential development, and as was noted by Kathy Yerka, the prior speaker, we don't have too many of these still in such pristine condition.
Yeah,
And
we just tore one down on Louise a while ago to make way for the YMCA project.
Right, that was the one, was 135 North Kenwood.
29.
Yeah. Yeah. Was
So
that-
I understand it's a huge undertaking by the new owners. At some
Was Kenwood, yeah.
preservation by neglect is sometimes a good thing.
Yeah, the problem is, they want to be good stewards,
Well, and-
This is that livability versus historic viability.
Well, understood. I think, again, it sounds like the livability-ish question to some extent is really boiling down to the noise factor.
Yes.
And it sounds like that noise factor is a separate issue that probably needs to be dealt with, again, if, as I think I heard, the car wash itself is not keeping up with its requirements to keep their noise levels down. I think I heard that.
Do you know if that's true?
Yeah, I haven't done any research into that, so.
Did you mention that, or did one of
No.
the speakers
I think
mention
The
it?
Ms.
owner.
Friedman. did.
Okay.
No,
No.
closed. Yeah.
So those are, and I too would like to suggest that, I'm sure with this new purchase, property taxes have increased incredibly. With the addition of livable space, they're going to go up a little more. So I might want to suggest to the owners consideration of a Mills Act
We have talked
Okay.
about that.
for
so.
some, tax protection.
Well,
Those
Commissioner
are my
Dooms?
thoughts.
Well,
Thank you.
the thing, as I've said, if they bring it up in front of the commission and they have the windows infilled, if we were to grant the windows being infilled, we most assuredly would tell them they would have to take the windows back out to qualify for the Mills Act. So it's damned if you do and damned if you don't.
So my suggestion is not infilling the windows, but applying for a Mills Act.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Commissioner Doom, do you have any comments?
Not to repeat anything that's already been said.
Okay. Do you,
Stuck in a hard place.
do you support the window infill, or you prefer not to see, or you,
I prefer
Just
not
express
to.
your feeling.
I prefer to leave it as it is.
okay.
For all reasons that have been stated, and to say anything different. We are the Historical Preservation Commission, and we're to preserve old buildings. And everything that's been said, applauding the owners and all that stuff, I approve that. And you have other alternatives to go and overturn us if we don't like our position. But I feel our position is to preserve what little we have left.
Thank you.
One last thing.
Yeah.
So if we say that we want to keep the no infill, and it goes in front of the DRB, they're going to take what we say here tonight, or are they just going to go ahead and rubber stamp putting the windows in anyway.
Well, I'm not, you want me to go there?
Yeah, kind of.
I think they would take what you say seriously.
Do you think so?
They will read and review exactly what we say.
Yeah.
We can't say what they will do after that,
Okay.
Yeah.
right?
But they're in a position to say no to this change. They're also in a position to say yes.
Yes.
I'm sure the Historical Society will come out, and there could be other issues that would be raised in that situation. And this is how our system works right now. And this remind me, because when we talk about one of our updates, this process relates directly to that update. So.
And like Mr. Moore, like you both have said, it is a terrible decision to be faced with the car wash across the street and preserving the old building, and it's a conundrum, to use the word we're using all night, the word of the day. Yeah. It is hard, and I feel for you. I really do, with the noise and windows.
Yeah,
And
one option would be to use the laminated glass to reglaze the existing windows facing the car wash with the laminated glass, which could help. I'm not sure what percentage that would be. But
talk to the code enforcement.
That could be sort of a compromise solution that the owner might choose to go with. But and then also it's the owner's decision whether to pursue this with design review board or not. So
Right.
that would be the first step, and then we'll just take it as we need to.
To council. It's
So
hard.
Just to offer my comments, thank you so much for bringing this before us, and thank you for your amazing efforts in preserving buildings, and especially multi-tenant, because yes, they come with a host of issues and tenant issues as well. So we appreciate the level of respect you're paying to this old building and preserving what you can, and also trying to keep your tenants happy. You're in a tough spot. With the beautiful architectural resource that we have here before us, I would be hard-pressed to approve the infill of the windows. The upper balconies provide an amazing balance and kind of undulation on that facade, where the facade moves in and out. And I think outdoor spaces for especially people in apartments is such an asset. And so I would hope that you could do something with the car wash across the street and solve the problem much cheaper than you could by doing all this work, and potentially creating a situation where you don't have the architectural resource, and nor does Glendale in its state today, where it could be on the register and offer Mills Act savings. So I would support my other colleagues who have spoken and say that I would not approve the infill. So would you like a motion, or are you just taking comments?
A motion's helpful, so
Motion's
I can give the if this goes to DRB, I could tell them what the vote was.
Okay. Would anyone like
So do we have a
to
motion?
make a motion?
An advisory motion.
An
Yes.
advisory motion that
The property ad.
the property at 107 North Columbus Avenue for the non-installation of windows on the second floor.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Commissioner Doom,
Yes.
Commissioner Votanian,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan.
Yes, we're the Historic Preservation Commission, so this is historic, so yes,
We are HPC.
we are.
Chair Shire.
Yes.
Okay, a vote 4-0 to recommend not approving the infill of the balconies. Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is 8. It's Planning Division updates and informational briefings. We have 8A. This is an update on the request for proposals for 2 proposed historic districts.
Well,
This is fun.
suspense is killing us. Sean Bursell, if you're watching, I'm very disappointed that you're not here tonight.
No,
Good night.
I thought there
he's
would
gonna
be.
miss it.
I thought there would be props. Well, I had every reason to think that he would have reason to be upset, and perhaps there is, but perhaps there isn't, because the RFP as of this afternoon is finished.
Great.
We have a timeline of how this will move forward. The RFP does need to get reviewed by the city attorney, but because this finishing of the RFP happened not long before the holidays. Not much is going to happen, and it would be pointless to release this right before Christmas and New Year's. So, where do I have? Did I put this thing? So we're going to release the RFP, assuming everything goes okay with the city attorney, on January 7th. Responses are due by February 11th. And then a rough timeline tells us that we will be conducting interviews with the firms, hopefully in March. Once we select a firm, we have to develop the contract. That used to be a horrible process that took a similar length of time to what this has taken just to get the RFP ready. That's been compressed by the city in recent years, so hopefully that will be shorter. So I have, in the timeline for the RFP, I have to be determined dates. Interviews in March, bring the proposal with the budget to City Council in April or May, and then hopefully the contract begins in May or June 2019. So we're still, a number of months out before we have people on the ground doing the survey, but this is a giant step forward. I have made many apologies for how long this has taken, so I'm just so happy that it's done that I'm not going to apologize about anything tonight.
Good.
And we'll just move forward. So,
For the benefit of the public, would you mind saying the two
Yeah.
historic districts
of
that
course,
this includes?
yeah. This is for 2 proposed historic districts that have been moved forward by the Historic Preservation Commission for consideration as districts. That would be the South Cumberland Heights District, which will finalize the boundary of the original 2004 Cumberland Heights District that was proposed and then withdrawn. So all of those properties would be designated as districts. And then the South Cumberland Heights has 7 additional properties that were not included in the original survey. So we're asking the whoever is the winning bidder to look at those properties and see if they fit into the district, which our initial and Preservation Commission's initial assessment was that it looks like they might. So, and then, excuse me, the second district is the Casa Verdugo district, about 121 houses. South Cumberland Heights is, I think, 215 or 16. And the Casa Verdugo district has a great concentration of craftsmen and period revivals and has interesting historic connections with the Casa Verdugo restaurant and the Pacific Electric line. So there we are.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you. Great job.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a lot of work. Thank you
After
for
all
doing
that time. And that's
8B
it.
is an update on proposed ordinance revisions regarding demolition.
Yeah, so we've been working for several months now on code revisions to prevent things from happening or to discourage things from happening, like what happened with the illegal demolition on Valley View of the Craftsman House there. City Council directed us, we proposed to City Council a very, very robust set of penalties that would be placed on owners who do illegal demolition of historic resources, and City Council told us to go with all of those. So we're making code revisions that incorporate all of that, and while we have the code open, we're making other changes of things that have come up in recent years. So an example of that would be we're discussing regulatory oversight, who has design review authority in pending historic districts, which we have a kind of an unofficial, well, we have an official read from the city attorney, but it's not codified anywhere, so we're making that clear. And then what I just mentioned in relation to this project, we make clear how we're going to review what we're calling potential historic resources in the future, and that's exactly what we did tonight with the 107 North Columbus property. So that process will be codified, and any property owner who has a 5S3 or higher, or lower number-wise, but anyone who has what we call a historic resource that's eligible for local, state, or federal listing, we can point them to a section in the code saying this is what we do with your property in terms of design review, and in that case it would be what we did tonight, advisory review with DRB being the final authority, and many other changes that I can't get into. So in terms of schedule on that, the city attorney and our planning staff are reviewing this. They just got it today, so 2 major milestones completed in 1 week. or finished in 1 week. And we have a date scheduled for February with City Council. We don't have a date yet, but we have to go to Planning Commission with ordinance changes. And then I'll be bringing this to the commission as kind of an advisory review. There's no official process for you to approve the ordinance. It's basically Planning Commission and then City Council. But we obviously want you to know what we're planning since it involves a lot of our stuff. And so hopefully that would be on January 17th.
Great.
And that's it.
So our next meeting is January 7th.
We were supposed to remind you to tell something during this section. Did you cover
That's
that?
what yeah.
Great, okay.
That we're going beyond demolition deterrence, so
Got
we're
it.
also looking at other aspects of the code that have been just need to be clarified, so.
Good.
Great.
Okay, with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 7:25.
Just in time.
Thank you all for